For first reading. The House comes to questions for oral answer, and question number 1 is in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for the GCSB. Will the Government Communications Security Bureau be able to access the content of any New Zealander's communications under the cybersecurity provisions of the Government Communications Security Bureau and related legislation amendment bill?
Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that a combination of the provisions in the bill, specifically 8A, 15A and 15C, mean the answer is no, not in the first instance. However, approval will be considered for GCSB to access content if a specific and serious cyber intrusion has been detected against a New Zealander. In those circumstances, the Commissioner of Security Warrants and I will need to be convinced that the action is necessary, falls within the function of protection and will be limited to content which relates to the cyber attack. Mr. Speaker, the cybersecurity function of the bill clearly states that it is to protect the security and integrity of communications. It's not for spying or putting people under surveillance.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, is it correct to paraphrase the Prime Minister's answer as no, they can't access the content of New Zealanders' communications, but yes, they can access the content of the communications under certain circumstances? And how are those two answers compatible?
Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, well, in principle, yes, but it's worth remembering it would have to be, in the event that content was looked at, it would require another warrant. It would be highly specific. It would be for the purposes of protection, and it would almost certainly be with the agreement of the New Zealander.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As he now has admitted that, in principle, yes, the GCSB will be able to access the content of New Zealanders' emails, did he tell New Zealand on Campbell Live last week, I quote, they would not have access to the content because...
Order. I have a point of order. Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, I just would ask you to consider the supplementary questions being asked, because it makes a strong assertion at the beginning of what we hope will become a question that is outside of standing orders. And I think, Mr. Speaker, it is not appropriate on a matter like this to have such gross misrepresentation allowed in the House.
Well, point of order. Speaking to the point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I'll hear from Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure you've realised, the difficulty is the answer to the primary originally said no, but then the Prime Minister went on and said, but in principle, yes. And the problem that we're dealing with is that the Minister's answer is incoherent. So we're trying to deal with that.
Order. No, well, I certainly don't think that last point of order was helpful, because if I go back to the very first answer to the supplementary, the member's interpretation of that answer is incorrect, and I think that's the point now that Mr. Brownlee is raising, and they're continuing to paraphrase the answer in the opinion of the member. I don't agree with the way it's being paraphrased. I ask the member to continue answering supplementary questions, but to bring them within standing order.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did he tell New Zealanders on Campbell Live last week, his sole substantial television interview on this issue, why did he tell them that GCSB would not have access to the content of their emails, to quote the Prime Minister, when he has just told us just now that in principle, under certain circumstances, they would?
Speaker,
right, Honourable John Key.
Members should stand corrected because it's not my only television appearance on the matter. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, because the answer is correct that I gave on Campbell Live. No, it's not possible, but it would be possible to go and get a further warrant and do some work if required.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Okay. Then, is the Prime Minister prepared to consider an amendment to make it abundantly clear to everybody, including those of us of the opposition who struggle to understand these things, that the bill will not allow access by the GCSB to the content of the communications?
Right Honourable
Speaker,
John Key.
It's not necessary. It's already in the law. In fact, the function of cybersecurity is clearly to protect, not spy. If the member wants to know what spying looks like, which is the claim he's making, he needs to go and look at Section 8B, where the GCSB work is all about gathering intelligence and the capabilities, intentions and activities of people. Of course, that is in relation to foreigners. The member should tell me where he can see those provisions in the cybersecurity. He can't. The truth is, no one on that side of the House understood the legislation. That's why they spent so much time filibustering, wasting time, instead of understanding the law. The people who look like fools are on that side of the House, not over here.
The answer's quite sufficient. Supplement. Order. Supplementary question, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary question to the Prime Minister. Has the Prime Minister seen any reports about the importance of security legislation like the GCSB legislation?
Right Honourable John Key.
Mr Speaker, I have. I've seen reports stating that, quote, the security of the realm should transcend party politics, and I recognise the support that members of the opposition are giving to the passage of this bill. That statement came from none other than David Cunliffe during the debates in 2003 on GCSB. They are the leadership qualities the Labour Party yearns for today.
Order. Not in order. Order. I have an interruption coming from Grant Robertson. Does the member want to take a point of order?
You're the person who...
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the GCSB receive funding directly or indirectly from the Government of the United States?
Mr Speaker,
Right Honourable John Key.
It's not in my interest or the national interest for me to answer that question. I don't think any Minister of GCSB would do so.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, there is a long-term tradition in this House that a member's interests, and the Prime Minister has said it's not in his interest to answer the question. He can say it's not in the national interest, but so we know it's not in his interest already.
Order. The Prime Minister, I think, has stumbled over the first words as he started that answer. He said it is not in the country's interest for him to continue to answer that question, and that is a perfectly satisfactory answer.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does that mean that the Prime Minister will not deny that the GCSB has received funding from the Government of the United States?
Right Honourable John Key.
Mr Speaker, no. It means that it's not in the national interest for me to discuss those matters.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Prime Minister outline for the House the increasing threat that the National Cybersecurity Centre has reported on?
Right Honourable John Key.
Mr Speaker, I can. The National Cybersecurity Centre reported that in 2011 it had 90 instances lodged with it. These constitute serious instances that do damage or compromise the target or company involved. In 2012, that number increased from 90 to 134. Mr Speaker, the number this year is already standing at 204, and we're not even near the end of the year. These attacks are steeply rising and putting at risk our government and our private sector security. The GCSB has a vital role to play in combating this, and that's why it's crucial the legislation is passed by the House.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe it is right, or indeed lawful, for the GCSB to receive funding from a foreign government without informing this Parliament?
Right Honourable John Key.
Well, Mr Speaker, firstly, the member should be very careful about jumping to any conclusions. It's not in national interest for me to discuss those kinds of matters. But what is really interesting is 24 hours before we pass the final GCSB legislation, that member doesn't even have a question on the matter.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Louise Upston.
Has the Prime Minister seen any other reports relating to the process under which the GCSB legislation is being passed?
Right Honourable
Speaker,
John Key.
I've seen the criticism from Sir Geoffrey Palmer of the process the bill has gone through. I've also seen a report that the State-Owned Enterprises Bill that was passed in Sir Geoffrey's name in 1986 had all of its final stages after Select Committee taken in one day, including Mr Palmer reading the third reading on a Saturday. That was a bill which completely redefined the government's role in business, corporatised government state-owned enterprises and set them up to be privatised, including the sale under Labour of New Zealand Steel, Petrocorp, Post Office, Air New Zealand, State Insurance and Telecom. If he wants to know about process, clearly he's an expert in the matter.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe in the basic principles of parliamentary responsibility for the government's finances? That is, Parliament must know when the government receives funding. If so, how can an agency like the GCSB receive money from a foreign government without Parliament knowing?
Right Honourable John Key.
Speaker, I'm not saying they are or they aren't.
Question number 2, Maggie Barry.
Thank you.